Well, I'm Dapper Dan Gavoston, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm Mischievous Marchinacchio, and I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man. But Dan, unlike what you said on that teaser trailer episode, the annuals don't count.
No, I said that they counted, didn't I?
I don't even know what you said anymore.
It must have been my variant. Well, anyways, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. In this case, thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Today on the show, Dan and I are going to be discussing both Sinister War #3 and Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5 #72. But first, buckle up because we're going to talk about the Sinister War #3. This issue was written by Nick Spencer and Ed Brisson, with pencils by Mark Bagley, Carlos Gomez, and Zé Carlos. Inks by Andrew Hennessy, John Dell, Andy Owens, Carlos Gomez, and Zé Carlos. Colors by Brian Reber and Andrew Crossley, and letters by VC's Joe Caramagna, and a cover by Bryan, Hitch, and Paul Mounts. That's 13 people on one issue. No wonder why it cost $4.99. It certainly wasn't because of the depth of the story, Dan. but creators got to get paid, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, when was this issue first released?
The issue was released on August 18th, 2021. Dan, why don't we just get right into it? Because I think that this is kind of the appetizer for Amazing Spider-Man #72 in this episode. So let's get into Sinister War 3 here.
Yeah, you know, my mother always told me never to judge a book by its cover. But I think in this case, that is really, truly the kind thing to do, which is I think these covers by Bryan Hitch have been really awesome. Like, I love seeing his interpretation of the character. Even his, like, spider toes. Like Spider-Man has these, like, bulbous toes on these covers, which I find humorous. Like, he doesn't have any padding on the bottom of his foot. And, sure, why not? You know we're starting off well when I'm talking about the padding of the toes on the cover of the issue.
Spider toes, a highlight for sure. I mean, in general, I think, both the cover and the interior art on these books is a strong suit. I mean, Mark Bagley's interior art here. I mean, it's not like this is like peak Bagley here, but I mean, like there's a lot of action and characters in these books, and I feel like they all look really exciting and well. I guess that's my very kind of general praise to get it out of the way.
Well, all we had to do was wait a week to get peak Bagley, because I don't know if you read Spider-Man Life Story Annual, but that's some of the best Bagley artwork I've ever seen in my entire life, and I'm a guy that loves Mark Bagley. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. This is a handsome looking book, even if it is 13 different people. I mean, I think for the most part, the transition between the various different artists is fairly smooth. There's stuff that's clearly not Mark Bagley, but I think it's in enough of a range of Mark Bagley that, like, the book remains smooth despite the number of people behind the action, so to speak.
Yeah. But in terms of the story, Dan, I, like you said, I'm with you with the general love for Mark Bagley. But in terms of the story here, I mean, we were not huge fans of Sinister War #2. This, I don't know if I would say it got worse from here, but it certainly didn't get better. And it just in general, like, this entire mini-series or offshoot or whatever you want to call it, it just feels so incredibly shallow, for lack of a better word. I just like what is the point of this mini-series outside of just collecting $4.99 an issue from people? Because I don't think, when you read this in concert with Amazing Spider-Man, it doesn't add anything. Like, I don't feel like there are any I don't feel like anything is happening here that's so important that like, oh my God, how do I not read this issue first or read this issue at all? Even like this, it just feels like utter filler. much in the vein of like the maximum clonage offshoots of the 90s. Like it's just a lot of stuff going on and a lot of characters, but none of it really matters, and that's just really disappointing. I mean, am I being too harsh here, Dan, or what?
I don't know. I mean, I think I found a few more things to like about this issue in terms of character stuff than I did the previous issue. But for me, I don't really understand. I mean, I think we talked about this last time. I don't understand the stakes of these issues, which is like they're all out to kill Spider-Man for Kindred. But Kindred has killed Spider-Man a dozen times already. So I don't really understand like why we need to go through all of this stuff. And I think it's meant to be like we're getting some kind of visual thrill out of this, but yeah, I don't know. It's not really offering me anything new, and honestly, I think it's taking away from the narrative of this final story because I feel all over the place. I mean, maybe I'm supposed to read just Sinister War straight through or whatever it is, but I'm like constantly every one of these new issues, whether it's Amazing Spider-Man or Sinister War, I'm like thinking about to myself like, okay, like what, like where were we again? You know, like what's going on with Peter? Is he getting like in this one he's like all bandaged up, and I had to remind myself, oh wait, yeah, that's because he got stabbed through the middle by a Kravinoff, right. And now none of those characters are around him anymore. He just escaped with a mortal wound. The whole thing is very baffling to me. So like I actually think the format is really like distracting me from like keeping up with any kind of like narrative elements of all of this. But yeah, I mean, for $4.99, you're not getting a lot out of this issue.
And I would also like the other thing I'd like to add about this is like which character, hero or villain, is truly getting elevated by this story? Because I don't think there's anyone. Like I mean, Kindred has become so tired at this point. I mean, the guy is just sitting there in the background monologuing about sins over and over again. Like the guy, you know, supposedly has all this demonic power, and as you noted, like doesn't choose to use it. Instead he's hiring henchmen to do it, and so he's been sidelined. He has no agency. Spider-Man is just kind of getting, like you said, stabbed in the middle and then showing up again and getting punched by other guys. I mean, we have, you know, this storyline features the return of Doc Ock in like his original villainous form here, and I don't feel like they've done much with him to advance like his story, and considering what he was for the last 6 or 7 years prior to this. You know, you can maybe make a point like, you know, we're seeing like some interesting like subtle character moments from Boomerang, but like not to be dismissive, but like we get it. Nick Spencer likes writing Boomerang, you know, so like he can give him a moment and it doesn't feel out of place. But like I don't know if these are elevating the characters in any kind of meaningful way. It's just kind of passing moments. And then to top it all off, this comic reintroduces the Sin Eater again, and you're just like, enough with this guy already. Like who cares? Like, what is he doing here? Like what is the threat level here? Like I don't get how this is now the boss battle. Like this whole thing is just a mess of like cramming a bunch of stuff in, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And I don't feel like anyone is coming away from the story in a more meaningful spot than when they came in. I mean, I think that's my biggest problem. That's why I think it's so shallow. I mean, like a moment here and there is one thing, but like, you know, as a whole, like I'm not walking away from the story being like, oh man, you know, the next time Spider-Man has to fight Doc Ock or Craven or whatever, it's going to be interesting because of what happened here. It's just stuff that's happening that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's funny because the thing that we latched onto when Spencer's run started in issue 1 was just how wonderful the stakes were, that they were finally being applied to Spider-Man after all this time, all of our moaning about volume 3 of Amazing Spider-Man, you know, that finally someone was going to make Peter face all of his decisions, you know, in that way. But like Kindred appearing at the end of that issue was a really exciting promise of like a villain that was going to take it to Peter Parker. But really, like, as much as he's doing, he still has yet to do really much of anything of consequence that I can grab onto. But he's the ultimate stakes reducer. I don't know what his powers are. I don't know the limitations of his power set. And so when he brings back the Sin Eater, it's like, of course, you know, like that character had, like, you may not have loved it, but he had an ending. There was an ending to that story that was interesting. You know, I actually thought it was one of the more kind of like interesting character deaths in this. Suddenly, like, I mean, it's like just an eye roll of a moment occurring in this. And you're right. And Kindred, too, the monologuing. I wanted to shout out our friend Available Alan Cherstel, who tweeted about this and put it the best way I could imagine. He said, it's like Kindred was bitten by radioactive monologue. and that is perfect. You know,
all he does is just talk, and like, you know, like at the very least, I mean, like, Kindred's got a cool look, but he doesn't do anything. Like, it's just like, do something, man. Like, what is this? Like, it's crazy.
He can't even commit to that look either. I mean, I dare you to tell me what color Kindred's jacket is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree 100% about the Sin Eater. I mean, it's just an eye roll moment. I don't get what we're supposed to walk away from here with the Sin Eater being back in any. Like, it's very frustrating. It's frustrating to talk about something like this, Dan, because like I don't have a lot to add. I'm not trying to be
I get it.
Glib. I'm not trying to be glib about it. I mean, like, okay, there's a moment between Spider-Man and Doc Ock where, you know, Spider-Man tells Doc Ock, you're not like this, and you know, I guess that alludes to the history of the characters. But again, like, I don't feel like that moment's really paid off in any kind of meaningful way. It's just kind of a thrown away moment.
Well, we're going to get into this when we talk about the Amazing Spider-Man issue in this episode. But like, to me, it's an example of how this book has been squandering its pages. You know, if you want that moment to land, I mean, I guess you can rely on the storytelling of other writers, which, fair enough. Like, that's how sequential books go, you know. But like, instead of having Dr. Octopus talking to a centipede in his head, why not establish like a fight between Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man in an earlier story that kind of like resets the stakes there and can make this moment mean something, you know? It's just a lot of this is just kind of hollow, relying on other stories, or just kind of the time was never spent in the pages of these comics telling you that these things are meaningful parts of this world. And reinventing Spider-Man with every new creator does get boring and laborious, and maybe isn't something we have to do. But you can't just like pluck parts of Spider-Man's history at random out and just expect them to carry all of the weight that they originally did. You know, like, cameos are hollow for a reason, oftentimes, you know, or Easter eggs or whatever. So anyway, like, I thought it was a good moment, but not one I had any kind of emotional connection to, especially because the thread of getting from Superior Spider-Man to the current Ock is buried in B titles that like people probably gave up on, you know, halfway through their run. Like, how many people truly read the Superior Spider-Man Christos Gage series all the way to the end? It's a good series. Maybe 5% of this audience.
Yeah, that's the thing too. I mean, like, you know, we had a major moment for a character that, like you said, like, very few people experienced the first time, and you know, those who are, you know, the majority of people who are probably experiencing this character now are probably like, wait, what's going on? He's not Peter anymore, or whatever. The kind of like master race Peter that Dan Slott made him. At the end of what was that? The Hydra story, right?
Oh yeah,
I'm trying to remember now.
The Captain America story. Secret Empire.
Anyway, thank you. But yeah, I mean, like, you know, like, say what you will about Dan Slott's Superior Spider-Man, but like, that was a very significant moment in the history of Spider-Man that, and and again, you could say, did it go past its expiration date? I mean, it's possible, but like it went on for even beyond the Superior Spider-Man title. Like, I mean, like that whole status quo lasted for years, and it was a significant thing. So, like, to have Otto back in this form and to kind of just be so lazy about it is just and so uninteresting about it. Like, it's just disappointing. I think that's the word I keep coming back to, and we'll get into it even more when we start talking about Amazing Spider-Man. It's just disappointing that like you said, these opportunities just feel wasted. There's potential here for some really potent storytelling, and I feel like at every turn, Spencer and the other creators who have input here are just choosing not to do it, and it just seems wasteful to me. Like, why should we be invested as readers if you can't invest in trying to tell the most compelling story possible? And if you think this is compelling, then we have very different definitions of what compelling is.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to round it out, I mean, I have to mention it, that the Senator's Return, as eye-rolling as that is, like also
Yes.
answers kind of one of our long-standing questions about like what happened with the Lethal Legion souls. Were they
Right.
returned? And I guess for plot reasons they weren't, but now they suddenly are. And so we've got the return of the Lethal Legion plus the Juggernaut, who I guess all this time had not had something. He's in his new Juggernaut costume from that Fabian Nicieza miniseries, which was quite good, actually. I recommend people check it out. And acknowledges nothing can stop the Juggernaut. But yeah, they are now the Sinful Six. I don't know if they have a committee meeting to come up with these names, but they are the Sinful Six. And now there are 6 Sinister Sixes. So we got 36 villains now, because that's what the story needed. I mean, at least it's a cleaner number, right? If you're going to do a bunch of Sinister Sixes, you might as well do 6 of them.
I mean, it's 6 and 6, and throw another 6 in there. It's the sign of the devil, right, Dan? I
Oh
mean, maybe that's
God,
where this is all going.
don't tell me that, because that seems that's that's where this is gonna go. If this whole thing is a
Yeah.
setup for a pun, I'm gonna lose my mind.
There you go.
All
There
right,
you
Mark.
go.
So
I mean, do you have a grade? I mean,
I was gonna say, speaking of numbers, let's get to the grades. We grade
all
with
right.
letters, so
I'm giving it a D minus, Dan. I mean, like I almost said F, but like I don't know. Like it to me, like a failure. The art's good, so we can't give it an F. But the story is really not good, Dan. Like this feels like a low point in Spider-Man history right now. But so D minus for me.
yeah, it's a D minus for me too. It's not an outright failure. I've read way worse Spider-Man comics. This is just something that I'm gonna forget, come tomorrow. I'm amazed. I remembered it as far as this review, Mark, but that's my thing. I gotta know these books. So
I mean, to be full disclosure here, I actually read ASM before I read Sinister War for reasons I won't really get into here, but and I don't feel like I missed out on anything in reading it out of sequence there. So there you go.
I felt like I missed things reading ASM, but for an entirely different reason. But in the
Well, there you go.
meantime, Mark, let's talk about our Slack.
Yeah, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
Yeah, and I hang out at the Slack all the time. Just this week, we've been discussing the No Way Home trailer. So if you want to join this awesome Spider-Man community, just follow the link in the description and be sure to say hi. And once you're there, let us know what you thought of this new episode that we've been talking about here. All right, Mark, let's get back to the action here.
Yeah, so now we're going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 5, number 72. This issue was written by Nick Spencer with art by Federico Sabbatini, Zé Carlos, Marcelo Ferreira, and Carlos Gomez. Colors by Alex Sinclair, and letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. The cover is Mark Bagley, John Dell, and Brian Reber. This issue was first released on August 25th, 2021. Whoa, boy, Dan. Some
Where
stuff
do we even
happens here.
start? Where do we even start on this issue, Mark?
This is, I said a few seconds ago, this is a low point in Spider-Man history, and you're right. That might have been a little bit of hyperbole, but in terms of retcons and changing significant portions of Spider-Man history, and what I would say, I mean, let's be blunt here, Dan. I think these are retcons for the worse. This comic might truly be a low moment in Spider-Man history.
I was thinking on our show, is this the issue that I'm going to take the most problems with of any issue we've discussed on the show? And like reading through it, it's like it's not offensively written, and I feel the same way about like the ones that people feel most problematic, like Sins Past and One More Day, or even like the introduction of Silk. Like reading it page to page, there are competent writers behind stories that do these major retcons that like are just really, I mean, I'm going to say it. I think this is one of the worst retcons in the series history. And it's like you can acknowledge like decent writing alongside like just a decision that just a lot of it comes down to my own personal taste. I think that this decision that's made in this comic is really bad, like to my own personal taste. I also happen to think it's a very poorly written comic in the span of this series or this run, but mostly due to my own personal taste and my own hang-ups about what I think is acceptable. Like you might have a different opinion for listening to this and you're like, I like this retcon. You're not going to get that opinion from me. I thought this was garbage, just garbage, Mark.
Yeah, well, let's acknowledge and just get it out there. What's the retcon here, Dan? What do you find so garbagey?
The retcon, as it appears to be for the moment, which I mean, Lord knows this could be undone next issue, is that Norman Osborn, before we ever met him, not only did Spider-Man make a deal with Mephisto, Norman, in the shadow of Mendel Stromm, who was a character earlier in this run, got to give it credit, was approached by Mephisto in the disguise of a businessman, ultimately revealed to be Mephisto, that in order for him to attain his glory with Osborn Industries and the Goblin Serum, all he wanted was the soul of his firstborn child, Harry Osborn. And so Norman took the deal. He sold Harry's soul to the devil so that he could have success. And so therefore his discovery of the Goblin Serum, his persona as the Goblin, all of that stuff, all the things we've known about Norman. I mean, I guess he had to be a bad father to make that deal. Like maybe the worst father of all time. But the ramifications of that seem to be that Norman and all of his problems and all of Harry's problems throughout the years were manipulated by the devil, not by the work of just an outright bad father who experimented with chemicals and takes out his abuse on his son, but the devil did it. It was Mephisto all along. String up the tune.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could probably spend an entire hour just talking about how this is all problematic. And I know we like to gab, but we shouldn't, because that's just a lot of time. But like, just off the top of my head, like what this retcon means. It's like, and I know a retcon, it changed. I mean, it's retroactive continuity. So like, it's supposed to be dramatic changes, but like, it completely changes everything that we knew about Norman Osborn and his history and his abusive nature and his like driven business needs. Because, even in the flashbacks you get prior to this deal with Mephisto, he seems to be a loving, doting father taking Harry to Coney Island, and so like it just like it just seems completely out of character within the context of this story as a starting point. But like, like among other things that this such a deal changes is frankly like the idea of what Norman's actions as the Goblin and how that and his abuse, how that affects Harry. Because like I feel like that like Harry's journey in Spider-Man, especially when you go back to like the J.M. DeMatteis run and stuff like that, I mean, like, this is like really potent character work, like this is some of the probably the best characterization that we've had in Spider-Man in the Spider-Man mythology. And when you just say no, none of that actually mattered because it was a deal with the devil, it just robs the character of all of the richness, in retroactively. Am I overreading this here, or are you getting the same kind of interpretation out of it?
No, I mean, I think it's akin to how people felt. I mean, I don't think people have quite the warm feelings towards Norman, but it's akin to how people feel when they're talking about One More Day, which is like the character wouldn't do this, or like it takes something away from the character, right? We've got 20 years of Spider-Man comics where he's married that suddenly have been altered in some way. And this is even farther reaching than that. I mean, this goes back to the introduction of Norman Osborn as a character, which even predates the introduction of MJ as a character, like suddenly this character we thought we knew has had motives completely different than we thought. And I don't know, it changes the character in some way, and maybe in a way that people can ignore, but like, I also think like, hey, like if this is where we've always long assumed it would go, which is like maybe to like clean up One More Day in some way, I really don't think you clean up One More Day by adding more Mephisto into people's lives. Like this just complicates it so much further than it needed to be complicated.
Yeah, so now I mean, essentially, and look, like I'm not trying to justify Peter's deal with Mephisto, but now you're essentially putting Peter and Norman on the same playing field, which is weird. But like, I mean, let's also just call us, call it as I see it here. I mean, like, basically, waving the magic wand here and being like, this is all due to a deal with Mephisto. And I know I said this again in Sinister War, but I'm going to say it with more emotion here. It's just so lazy, like just insultingly lazy storytelling. Like I can't come up with a better idea, so I'm gonna just make it a deal with Mephisto. I mean, that's pathetic. I mean, that like, and if he's listening, he probably doesn't listen to us anymore because we've turned on the run. But like, like, I just expected so much more out of Nick Spencer out of this run, and I wasn't even someone that was necessarily sold on him as someone that had the potential to really rise to the occasion in Spider-Man here. But like, to me, like this just seals the deal. Like, it's just incredibly lazy and shallow and insulting to the audience. Like this is what you've been building for 70, what issue is this, 72, 73? I don't know, like that to me is just like it's beyond reproach. It's just so lazy. I'm gonna say that word over and over again because I don't know how else to describe it.
I don't know if I want to go so far as to saying the L word for this, but for me, it's not even like that, because I could see like a writer saying like, hey, if I'm going to deal with Mephisto, like, bringing him in is appropriate in some regard. For me, it's just a bad idea. Like if this is the kind of idea that it takes to sell Marvel on giving you a run of Amazing Spider-Man, and this is the thing you promised all along, like, it gives me serious pause about who is behind greenlighting these or advising these stories. Like, this is just not something that we needed. Like, there's another way to do it. And like, I cannot understand like why this is the way it is. And maybe in the next 2 issues it'll get cleaned up in a really interesting way, but it just wasn't needed outright. Like, you're like, I think we'd all kind of move past One More Day to some regard. I mean, there are certainly people that will never move past One More Day. Like, but to double down on it, like, it's beyond being bold and daring. It's just being dumb.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, like, you're calling it a bad story. I'm calling it lazy. I mean, in my words, lazy is almost like, I don't want to say giving them more credit, but it's like, you know what? They just ran out of good ideas, so they're being lazy. They're taking a shortcut. But to imply that no, it's not lazy. It's very intentional and was thought out and game planned early on. Like, to me, is even more damning. It's like, to me, lazy is like the ticket out. Like, you know what? You just ran out of good ideas, so you made a lazy one. But like, yeah, the fact is, if this was the pitch in 2018 when this all started, wow. I like you said, who actually said, yeah, I think that's what people want. Or if they don't care what people want, I think, who was the one who said, yeah, I think that's what we want to see as editors and creators on this book. Because like, it just doesn't, I don't know, Dan. Like, this is bad stuff, man. Like this story has taken a turn I did not expect it to turn. And like you said, this could obviously get cleaned up in a couple of issues. Frankly, whether it gets cleaned up or not, I think this idea is not going to last much longer than the duration of this run, because I don't know, similar to One More Day, I don't know what creator is going to want to really touch this idea going forward. Or maybe similar to Sin's Past. Maybe that's the storyline that I think is the more appropriate analog here, because it's like, who really wants to play around with this after in a year? I can't think of somebody, because this is just a mess of plot twists that lack in logic and that negate so much history and meaningful content. That's the thing too. It's like, you just negated how many years worth of stories with a wave of a hand here. It's crazy.
I mean, yeah, I don't know if I feel like they're negated, but it's like they're definitely weakened in some way. It's just a complication.
I think we're picking nits in language here, but yeah, I mean, like, to me, negated meaning like you've taken the teeth away from so many stories. Like like you said, they've been neutered essentially. Maybe that's the word. Maybe wrong N word. They've been neutered.
Well, I mean, this is a solid like bridge to the other thing I want to talk about, which is like that I think that the issue itself is just beyond that idea. Like, the rollout of that idea is handled so poorly, which is like, this book requires an incredibly strong knowledge of a very obscure Spider-Man story from 1996 called Spider-Man Legacy of Evil. And I'll tell you, Mark, the only reason I know about this story, other than being a massive dork, is that I went on like a Spider-Man like dollar bin binge buying spree, because I'm now on this weird quest to buy every Spider-Man book I come across, because Lord knows I can't stop, Mark. I included the annuals, and now that extends everywhere. I've gone crazy. Maybe I've made a deal with Mephisto, and I have to just collect forever. So I picked this up like 2 months ago in a dollar bin, Legacy of Evil, and was like, this looks cool. I like the creators behind this. I'll give it a shot. And, historically, if you don't know, Legacy of Evil was released like right before the Revelations storyline, which is like the return of Norman Osborn. and the story is kind of like out of continuity. Like this should be in the heart of the Clone Saga, but Ben Reilly's never mentioned in it, and it like really deals a lot with the Goblin. So it's kind of like a Goblin story to get you back in the mood of the Goblin. And if I didn't really know much about this, look, Mark, we have our own Spider-Man show. How many people reading this are going to know about it? And upon reading it, it is really the foundational, like, functioning heart point of this issue. So I'm curious, Mark, what is your history with Legacy of Evil? And yeah.
I am fairly certain that I have a copy of it in my possession somewhere. And when I bought it, I read it. But yeah, man, like I was not primed on it going into this storyline. So like, any references visually or narratively that it made, like went completely over my head. Like it's been that long since I've looked at this story, since I've thought about this story. So I again, not to humble brag, I wrote a book about Spider-Man, Dan. For the 5 or 6 true hardcores that remember the story page for page and were able to pick out a bunch of stuff and how it ties in here, and it helps your appreciation for the story, and maybe that's why we don't appreciate it. Kudos, total kudos. But similar to, frankly, what we kind of have talked about at several moments of the Spencer run is I feel like when you start mining such obscure or old content, I mean, we're talking 25 years old story here, an obscure story from 25 years ago, you're just alienating your audience. You're not engaging them in any kind of way. You're just kind of showing off like, hey, I know my continuity. People used to kill Dan Slott for that kind of stuff all the time. And, I'm not about to make this podcast into a Dan Slott versus Nick Spencer thing here, but again, I think people's rush to run Dan Slott out of town because of some of his ideas, I think if Dan Slott did half of the stuff that Spencer's been doing in this run, there would be, people would, the reaction would be far harsher than what we've seen in terms of Spencer stuff. I mean, I feel like we're the most negative people about Spencer for whatever reason over the last few months. So anyway, that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of problems with this, which is one, if you're going to make a reference and make it this essential to reading, I think the editor's notes were there actually for the first time, which pointed this out, which thank God, and reminded me of this story. But you'd think maybe this story would be available somewhere, like say Marvel Unlimited, we are heavily referencing not only this book, but all of Spectacular, under JMD, and that's not available anywhere on the Marvel store or Marvel Unlimited. I don't understand why there's not more synergy there, and that is beyond Nick Spencer's control. But it just seems like a really silly thing that Marvel's missing out on that when they have so many backwards-looking comics coming out, to have the books that they're based off available for people who want to read it. And I can't imagine how hard that would be, beyond sending an email and saying, hey, guys, scan this and, add it to the Unlimited, list for the week. So, I mean, that's just a more kind of general philosophy thing. But the second thing is, if this story is going to be so key in such a specific way, enough to get people to be that have read it to their brain to wrinkle and be like, oh yeah, I remember that. That's cool. Why not build in some of these elements leading up to it? It just seems like out of nowhere we're bombarded with this reference to this book in a key moment in the story, and it's I don't know, man. Maybe guide us here a little bit. Did you feel alienated? You were I didn't really know what was going on, given that you haven't read that story in so long?
Yeah, 100%. And then, like you said, there is, not to jump around here, but like, we get this at one point in this comic, this kind of tableau of moments of Harry after Norman sells his soul to Mephisto, and there are moments that are frankly very recognizable. Like Harry at the coffee bean, Harry ODing on drugs in the drug code issues, him dying in Spectacular 200, and then all of a sudden there's a panel of the Goblin knocking off Gwen Stacy off the bridge, and my initial read of that was, oh, why are they showing Norman's Goblin in this Harry motif? And you point out what you point out here, Dan, because this went over my head completely.
Okay, well, get ready for the mother of all retcons, potentially. Right. I mean, either it's sloppy narrative storytelling, or we're like subtly bringing in like the mother of all retcons, which is, okay, so in Legacy of Evil, this is when Harry is like assumed to be dead, right? Like, but he's actually in Europe or whatever this story seems to be implying now. I don't know. Anything with Harry is up in the air as far as I'm concerned, including what I'm about to discuss. So, at the beginning of this story of Legacy Evil, like Spider-Man and Ben Urich and all them, or specifically, I think like Liz Allen is attacked by these characters called the Goblinettes, these like 3 female goblins. And so like they're wondering, who is back from the grave? Like, is this Norman? Is this Harry? And Spider-Man talks about how, he has encountered this computer simulation of Harry, which has been plaguing his life. Like, for example, with the robot parents and stuff like that. Like, there's a while there where like Harry and Norman would show up on like computer screens and cackle, maniacally. Am I missing any major stories that involve that kind of motif? The Clone Saga, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, did you mention Peter's parents?
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. No, yeah, no, I don't think you're missing anything else there.
Yeah. So, so they have to figure out like, okay, well, who is sending these goblin characters after us? And they're like kind of recounting the history of, like Spider-Man. And it's weird because like Ben Urich suggests that it was actually Harry who killed Gwen. And Spider-Man like takes a second and like, did I hear that right? And he like stops Ben and he says like, no, it was Norman who killed Gwen. And so like it's like, okay, yeah, that's how the timeline works out, and they don't really return to it again, and it's a really strange moment, and that made me think of this as like, wait a minute, are we suggesting that it was Harry Osborn that killed Gwen that night? So I went back and reread 121 and 122 to see if that's like even a possibility. Like, I wanted to see, like, do we see Norman? Does he refer to himself as Norman? And no, there's no moment where on the bridge, the character there refers to himself as Norman Osborn. We see Norman going crazy and he's like, I'm going to like get Spider-Man. And we see Harry losing it too. And we see the goblin show up at Gwen's place, and she's thinking about Harry at that moment when the goblin shows up. And then after the death of Gwen, the goblin flies off, and we then return to like crazy, like we return to like Harry, being crazy. And then eventually like Spider-Man corners the goblin, like goes and finds the goblin and kills Norman. So there's these gaps in time. So like, I think there's a real chance here, Mark, that Nick Spencer is ready to suggest that it was Harry Osborn that killed Gwen Stacy.
I mean, which, if that be the case, again, kind of going back to what I was saying during Sinister War, what does that add to the mythology beyond a change?
I don't know.
I mean, okay. Sure, if you want to go in that direction, I mean, but then why does this matter? You know, you got 2 issues left, I guess, to prove why it matters. I don't know. Like,
I mean, at this point, I'm half expecting when Kindred is revealing his face at the end there that it's not Harry, it's going to be Gwen or something.
It could be anything at this point, Dan. I mean, like, you know, we have been so falsely misdirected by the creators of this story that, you know, like we're not playing within any kind of rules anymore. We're just doing stuff, you know, like that's the game here. The game is we're gonna do stuff because we said so, which is frustrating as a reader because, you know, you want rules, but, you know, we're not getting rules.
I mean, like, think back to those Absolute Carnage issues where we were getting the flashbacks of those scenes and Gwen was so prominently featured, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, like, whatever it is, I think he's had this idea the whole time, and we're seeing it come together in a really slapshot way. And it's like, we just have to accept it. Like, all this time we were like, okay, maybe the end will justify it. What if the end is worse than anything we've encountered yet?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, what if the end is worse than One More Day? Like, this guy is like just like looking to be run out of Marvel Comics, which granted he just left, but yeah, I don't know.
This is true. I mean, you know, frankly, you know, we have this huge status quo shift coming up in a few months, and we don't exactly know why yet. You know, is Peter dead or badly hurt, whatever it is. So, you know, I'm assuming somebody knows, which is why we're getting it. You know, beyond all that too, frankly, you know, whether they're leaning on Legacy of Evil or not, like, I just also found both the visual and narrative of this comic to be really confusing and unclear in terms of its structure, with, you know, whose face is morphing into whose. It wasn't enjoyable in that regard because I don't want to have to be thinking that hard. Like, just tell me what I need to be looking at here. You know what I mean? Like, it's comics, it's sequential art. Like, this shouldn't be this hard.
Right. Like, all of that is out of Legacy of Evil, right? The like computer simulation of Norman that morphs into Harry. Like, that's from Legacy of Evil, and that whole lab that we see there. You know, in that it's got, you know, Harry has got Normie kind of suspended over this Osborn formula that's in the middle of the room. Here, there's the addition of like 2 what look like cloning tubes, which makes me like, I'm sure they're going to play into the ending of the story because they're very prominently featured. I don't have any idea what it means. Was Harry cloned? Was Gwen cloned? Was Norman cloned? I don't really care. It's going to work out however it works out. But like, on top of that, also, like, we're getting a number of promised reveals here, but they're things that have already been revealed. So it almost feels like it's just yanking our chain even further. Like, we've got like Harry going into the morgue with Carly Cooper and pulling back the, you know, sheet on the body. Like, ostensibly, I guess he's going to find his own body.
Right.
But we've already seen that. So then the implication there is like that it's not his body, it's someone else's body. I don't really know, but I like, either way, it either makes me like, it's either boring because we already know that, or 2, it's going to be some twist that's going to piss me off likely. Or we're just robbed of seeing Harry's response to that. And the same with the reveal of Kindred at the end. Like, he's like, you know, he starts talking to himself in this we voice. And the implication there is that Kindred is not who we've long thought it to be, Harry Osborn. And we've already gotten him pulling his mask off and revealing it's Harry Osborn. Like, is he have another layer of face? Like, you know, I guess the chameleon is there with whatever serum it is. It's just so much to keep track of. And all of it just makes me feel like I'm being yanked around in a way that's not comfortable. And maybe that's what it takes to throw people off your scent in comics where people like us are dissecting them. But then, so whatever, don't do it for us, you know? Do it for someone else, because like, this is just really weirdly told.
Yep. Do you have anything else you want to point out here? Because I'm kind of similar to Sinister War. I'm kind of running out of things to say outside of sigh and disappointment.
No, I really don't think so. I mean, I think it is neat that the cover of this issue is a callback to Amazing Spider-Man 200, the image of like the Green Goblin standing over Spider-Man on the ground. Like that's a really iconic image, I think, from that book, and it's neat to see it referenced here, even if I don't like the story. So yeah. Anyway, I mean, like I think the big thing, Mark, is we don't think it's well told. But on top of that, like we really don't like the idea, and so that like if you like the idea, your mileage is probably going to vary from ours greatly. And I don't think we're prejudging this like the conclusion of this story yet. I mean, like I'll happily be turned around, but like if this is what it says it is, it's totally lost me, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, like, you know, I to a point you were making a few minutes ago, like okay, if you want to try and like outsmart the smarty guys like you and me, that's one thing, but like this has just become so convoluted and complicated that I just, I don't know, and I'm not I'm trying to say this carefully because I don't want to make it sound like I'm calling anyone disingenuous about their tastes, but I just don't know who this is for at this point. You know what I mean? Like who is the segment of the fan base that this is supposed to appeal to? Because I just can't figure it out. Like is it just like people who grew up in 1996 reading Spider-Man comics? Because I mean, I guess there's some out there, but other than that, I just can't figure out who is supposed to be like, yeah, this is hitting my sweet spot here. Because it just seems odd to me. We're pretty open-minded people about this kind of stuff, and like my mind is almost become completely closed to it. After all these reveals. So anyway.
And it's not about Spider-Man. Like, Peter is such a non-entity in so many of these stories. I have no connection to that story. So, all right, Mark, let's get to the grades.
It's not about Spider-Man, and frankly, it's yet again similar to Sinister War. It's really not about Kindred either. Now it's Osborn nonsense. So, like, who is the protagonist of this story?
I don't know.
Like if like. And give me a miniseries with Norman. I don't know. Like, don't. At least Sue's back in the day.
I don't know how a writer like Nick Spencer, who can write something like Superior Foes, is capable of writing something like this. I never imagined it would get to this point.
Yep. Again, I am loath to go lower than this score for various reasons, so I'm giving this a D-, although I find this D- to be more firmly entrenched in the minus than Sinister War 3 was.
I'm Mark. I'm giving it an F.
All right, we got it.
I think we're gonna look back on this comic and be like, "What a steaming pile of garbage!" Like, let's just ignore that. I think we're gonna be talking about this like. Look, I didn't like the end of Superior Spider-Man. I found that really disappointing. I don't even have my hopes in this anymore. Like, I just am like, sure, like, let's move on so we can forget about it. Like,
well, that's it.
Norman is run by Mephisto. That's a sentence I'm saying. Norman sold Harry's soul to Mephisto. I can't believe I'm saying that sentence.
So we can be better than Mendel Strom. Anyway, it's pretty crazy, and that's where we're at. So
I tried to explain this to my wife, and she said, "You realize when you talk about these things, there's a certain point where I just stop listening." And I'm like, "Yes, but I want you to know that I would stop listening to this too. That's how crazy it is."
I mean, there was that meme going around about like a moment in comic book fandom that made people go, "The what?" And this is definitely that moment.
All right. Well, you know what? I hope some of our listeners felt some kind of catharsis while listening to this. But we're gonna move on.
If you want to donate to that catharsis, how can they do that, Dan?
Right. Of course. If you find this show entertaining or valuable, why not consider supporting us? You can recommend Amazing Spider Talk to a friend, or if you're able, become a member on the Patreon.
We can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. We are constantly making exclusive content for our members.
Yeah, so why not take $3.99, the price of a new comic, and put it towards a month subscription to support the show and start receiving our Patreon content. That way you'll hear our Patreon exclusive review podcast on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man the same week it comes out, instead of waiting for it to arrive in our public podcasting feed.
And if you contribute $10 a month, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists commissioned exclusively for our members. This season, we'll be mailing out a print by artist Ron Frenz, who has created a lost page of the kid who collects Spider-Man for us, which was inked by Brett Breeding. This image depicts Tim and Spidey sharing laughs over Tim's Spider-Man comic collection. Plus, every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
Yeah, and like we say every time, we know this is a hard time for everybody, as it is for Mark and myself. So we appreciate anybody that supports the show just by listening and sharing to our community. So, but if you have the means, why not join our Patreon and support our continued existence and ravings about insane things like Norman Osborn making a deal with the devil? Just follow the link in the description. And again, a thank you to all the members who already make this show possible. It's so successful. It's the kind of thing someone would sell their child's soul to the devil to get, but we don't have to because of you guys.
Wow. Well, Dan, on that note, it's time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this episode was edited by Rick Coast with production support from Andy Myers. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Frenz, Sal Buscema, and Ray Sumser. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider Madge. This episode was originally released on Patreon as a live stream hangout with us back when the comic was first released. So if you'd like to help support our show's continued existence and these reviews while joining us on the live stream, why not head on over to our Patreon and sign up? So, Mark, until it is revealed that you sold your undying love of annuals to Mephisto in exchange for some Canadian bacon, what's our motto?
It's quite the deal there. With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.
Two men who know the angles, uncover and untangle all the questions and the webs left out to tangle. Be in 1962, last Wednesday's afternoon, they'll bend your ears with reckless self-abandon. The Amazing Spider